Well, good evening, Forest Mill. It is good to be with you again. Certainly have been blessed with some really beautiful weather today. I was looking outside at not a cloud in the sky, uh, great temperature, just a gorgeous early fall day for which I was really thankful. I know a lot of you are going through difficult times and struggling because we can't be together, and there is a lot to be concerned about. But even in the midst of that, we can be thankful for the beauty of God's creation and His care over all of creation, us included. Well, it is Wednesday evening, and it is the night or the day after the first presidential debate that was last night. And I don't know if you got to watch it. If you didn't, I'll save you the pain. It was really not worth watching from my vantage point. It was just some angry people talking over one another, and I didn't hear. I was watching, hoping to learn something, hoping to get something of substance, to learn about healthcare plans or plans for the economy, and really, it was just kind of none of that. It was ugly. Most pundits call it the worst presidential debate ever. Some said it was the most unpresidential debate ever. And I think those titles sort of fit. And it was with that in mind that I was reading the psalm that we were going to be looking at tonight, Psalm 82. It's another psalm of Asaph. In the previous psalm we looked at, Asaph had been talking about how God is going to judge the world. And in this particular psalm, we look at how God is going to judge the judges. Now, the judges in Israel had a unique role. They had a civil role and a religious role as well, because the two were really not separated as we see in our society. But that gave them a lot of power, a lot of responsibility, and with this responsibility and authority comes a great deal of expectations from God. And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about what sort of leaders do we as people want, and I don't even just mean us as Americans or us as Manchester or Coffee County citizens, but what sort of judges do we as human beings want, right? What if you had to sit down and make up a list of what sort of authorities, what sort of people in positions of authority do you want? We might say we wanted people who were kind, merciful, righteous, impartial, right? All those things and probably many more would make our list. People who were true to the law. And God certainly has given civil and authorities a great deal of power and put a lot of expectations on them. And we're going to see tonight just how God holds them up to that standard. So we're going to start with Psalm 82, verse 1. We'll read that, take a little bit of a break, and talk about it, and then we'll keep going down at verses 2 and through 7. So verse 1, Asaph says, God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Now, we need to stop and talk about this here because of the word gods here. There are some different interpretations about who the gods are, but I'm going to give you what I really think is the right interpretation. I don't often say that. Sometimes I'll just give you a few different opinions about it, what it could be, and tell you what the implications for that would be. But tonight, I want to tell you what I think the right one is, because I think it's really important for the interpretation of this particular psalm. I don't think that he's referring here to like the false gods that were set up and people worshipped And although that certainly happens in Israel's history, but God wouldn't have to judge those gods because they don't exist. I don't think either that he's referring to celestial beings like angels. I don't think that fits the circumstance at all. Rather, I think these gods that he's referring to are in fact the human authorities that God has set up in Israel to pass judgment. I think it's the judges, that the judges themselves are the gods. And so Asaph begins by saying, where God is and what God's doing and how he is passing judgment on these gods. Now, God is the lawgiver. That's true. But he's also the judge. And the judge of all the earth always does exactly what is right. He presides over the congregation of Israel and all of the judges of the nation. He is the authority over the authorities. And God, unlike our judges, God is not sitting up on a bench listening to the facts presented by the prosecution or the defense. God doesn't need to know the facts, right? He doesn't need to hear anybody's side of the story because he knows the story. And he knows our side and the other side and every side in between. He knows all of that. He knows exactly what people are doing on earth and exactly what their actions deserve in consequence. In God's court, there's no defense. There's no appeal. You can't have God's decisions overturned. There's no higher court, no higher authority. So God is omniscient. He knows everything, and his verdicts are final. It is an awesome occasion. God is standing there before the nation, and he's about to pronounce his decision, his judgment. These gods, again, are the leaders of the people, the judges, and Jesus kind of makes this clear in verse 6. Makes verse 6 clear in John 10, verses 34 through 36. Jesus quotes it in that connotation, and we see then that the gods are in fact human authorities in the nation. And there are several other instances where these authorities are called by titles like gods. So that's what that leads me to interpret it in that way. So now let's look at verses 2 through 7. Read the judgment of God. And God says, "How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. The gods know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods. You are sons of the Most High. But you will die like mere mortals. You will fall like every other ruler." These judges were not doing what God had called them to do, right? We're told in Micah 6, verse 8, to do justice, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's the dictate that God has given us, and especially for the leaders to do justice, enact justice, and love mercy, and walk humbly. And based on what we read about them here, it's clear they weren't doing any of those things. The justice they were meting out did not serve the needs of the nation. It served the wicked. They were showing partiality to the wicked. Likely this is indicating some sort of bribe. They were taking care of the wealthy because the wealthy were taking care of them. Again, calls into question, even in our own system of government. How many times over the years have we seen just what politicians and judges and law enforcement officials, what a precarious position they're in, and sometimes despite the best of intentions that we might have set out when this nation was founded, even our officials can be corrupted. We hear stories of people in authority who have been bought by one crime organization or another government, or by people who are in power in corporations, or right. Those stories float around, and some of them are actually caught and prosecuted. But we know that the possibility always exists, because the possibility has always existed, even among God's people. The judges fell prey to the wicked. The wicked were now determining what was going on. And God calls for them, instead of defending the wicked, he says, defend, and this is who God wants them to defend: the weak, the fatherless, right, the orphans, the poor, and the oppressed. That's who God calls for them to defend. It says, rescue the weak and the needy from the hand of the wicked. The wicked have always sought power and control, and it has always been at the expense of the weak and the needy, those who are incapable and unable to defend themselves, those who have no other alternatives, those who have no way out of their situation. And God calls on these judges to turn away from their wicked ways, turn away from fighting for and defending the wicked, instead to defend these weak and these needy. And then he said that these gods know nothing; they understand nothing. Here they are; they're supposed to be experts in the law of God, right? They're supposed to know exactly what God expects of them and what God's judgment would be in these situations. And God says they don't know anything. And then there's an interesting phrase there at the end of verse 5. It says they walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. Now, what's interesting about this particular phrase, the they there, they walk about in darkness. Some believe that the they there is the judges, that they are so blind to the law of God that they're walking around in darkness, right? But there's another interpretation that I thought was really interesting, that the they there actually is referencing back to verse 4, to the weak and the needy, that they're living under a system that has left them destitute and in darkness, right? They walk about in darkness because nobody is telling them the law of God. Nobody is enacting the law of God on their behalf. And so they're stumbling around like in darkness. Now, you may have done this before. I know that I have, where you turn the lights out, maybe getting ready for bed, or you get up in the middle of the night and you think you know the path to through the living room or to the bathroom or into the kitchen. And then next thing you know, you catch the corner of the coffee table, or you step on a Lego or kick the dog. I think I've done all of those things, maybe on one trip. But when you do that, you realize just how vulnerable you are without the light. And if these weak and these needy people, the poor, the fatherless, the oppressed, if they have nobody holding up the light of the law of God to light their way, then they truly, truly are helpless. But either interpretations are an indictment, whether you believe that the judges are walking around in darkness or the people they're supposed to be taking care of are walking around in darkness. Both should tell us the shortcoming, indicate a serious shortcoming among the judges, that either they know nothing about the law of God and are stumbling around, or that they have so failed the people they're supposed to serve that the people are walking around blind. And so finally, now down in verse 6, verse 6, God says, I said you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High, right? Now, this is a verse that Jesus quotes when he calls himself the Son of God. He gets questioned by it, by the teachers of the law. And they're like, what right do you have to call yourself a son of God? And Jesus points back to this particular verse here, Psalm 82, verse 6, because God had called these judges, these terrible, terrible judges, called them gods and said, you are all sons of the Most High, reminding them of their place in this world, that they are supposed to be his representatives here on earth. They're supposed to be sons of the Most High God and live into that reality. And Jesus basically says, if those men, those judges could be called sons of the Most High, why couldn't I, as God's representative on earth, sent from heaven above to teach, to live, to sacrifice my life on behalf of these people, to lay down my life? Why do you have such a problem calling me a son of God? So it's a really, really powerful verse. And then Asaph closes it out himself. It's like God stopped speaking there at the end of verse 7, where after reminding these judges that no matter how powerful they are right now, no matter how much gain they might get from the wicked, no matter how in control they feel like they are of their fates, that they're going to die. And God says, you're going to fall just like every other ruler, no matter how invulnerable we might feel. And the older I get, the less invulnerable I feel. That's for certain, partially as my body ages, but more because I realize my own shortcomings, my own mortality, not just in facing death, but my own limitations. I had a Bible professor. It was early in my grad studies, and we were talking. I can't remember the particular topic, and somebody asked him a difficult question, and he said, "Well, this is one of those things," because our professor was an expert in this particular field, and somebody asked him a hard question. He said, "It's one of those things. The more you know about it, the more you realize how much you don't know. Right? The more you learn, the less you know, because you realize just how much you are limited by your humanity." And so God seeks here to remind these judges that no matter how powerful they might be right now, they are limited like every other human being, like every other person in authority. And then Asaph closes it out after God finishes speaking there at the end of verse 7. Asaph closes it out by calling for God. He says, "Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your inheritance." This call for God to rise up and judge the earth is far beyond the original scope of this particular psalm, right? God speaks about the judges of Israel. He speaks to the broken men who are leading one particular nation. And Asaph says, God, don't just judge us, judge the whole earth, because all the people are yours. In other words, we want your righteousness and your justice, not just in Israel, but everywhere. And the great redeeming story of Scripture is that is exactly what Jesus came to do, to break the people of God's mold out of just the nation of Israel and spread them like the seeds of a dandelion floating on the wind all around the world. That God's justice and judgment and righteousness can be lived out by people of all nations and all tribes, by all the people of the earth are God's inheritance, that we are indeed all sons of the Most High. We deserve to be called, because of Jesus' sacrificial atonement, we deserve to be called sons and daughters of God. Well, may God bless you and the study of his word this evening. I hope you have a great week for us, Neil. God bless.